welcome back to another episode of Activism Uncensored. Today we have Peter, who has his own podcast called Tipping Points. Peter, why don't you tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. I started off as a drummer in a band. So I did my degree in mathematics at Southampton, and after that finished, I thought I'd much rather go and have a good time playing music. And so I was a drummer in a band for 4 years. The band didn't take off, but I did learn quite a lot about being in a group. But from then I thought about training to be a teacher. So I became a maths teacher for a number of years, and I was teaching over in Beijing. And this is where I learned the issues around air pollution. I became quite obsessed about air pollution while I was there, trying to make sure that either I wasn't and the students weren't being exposed to as much air pollution as there was. And it proved to be an impossible task because you just can't escape the air, right? And after returning from China, I worked on antimatter physics for a little bit. And then after that, I thought, okay, I'm going to do a bit of research on air quality. So now I'm doing a PhD in aerosol science, which is at Imperial College in London. And when I started to do this, I started to realise the scale and the urgency of the climate crisis. So I didn't fly anymore, didn't eat meat anymore, didn't drive anymore, and I made a lot of differences to my own life. And then I realised that doesn't do it. You know, it's not like, oh, all I need to do is change what I'm doing and suddenly the planet's going to be fine. It didn't seem to do anything, right? So I've kept all of those restrictions, although I should say that they're changes to my own behaviour since then, and I still do now. But I've realised that activism was going to produce the biggest change. So I was a bit nervous, actually, to start off with joining an activist group, because I was a bit worried that, might be a bunch of nutters. So I went to an XR protest and I walked around and I thought, you know what, these people are talking total sense, and it makes sense to me. And even more so, I found that there was a group of scientists, and I felt that as a scientist myself, I might be able to help contribute to the cause with knowledge or with peer review stuff or something. So I joined Scientists for XR about 3 years ago. And it was this group where I found my greatest connection with a group who were fighting for the big changes that we needed. And I didn't really know very much about these people. It was very soon after joining that we were in lockdowns, and I didn't really have the ability to go and speak to these people in the pub or anything like that. So I created this podcast called Tipping Points, where I had a chat with them about what got them into activism, a bit about their own lives and any difficulties they were having, especially with friends and family who weren't kind of getting it. At the early stages, a lot of my friends and family were saying, oh, all you need to do is something, right? And I couldn't cope with it. And so I started to actually lose friends and falling out with family and so on. And it was through speaking with people on tipping points that I find that other people suffered the same thing, and that I wasn't alone anymore. And that being in a group of people who were all like-minded and had the same experiences, suddenly I became to feel a bit more like myself. I was going through a real depression at that time because I felt so alone. And it was the tipping points and the activism that really saved my life. Because without those things, I don't know how things would have gone, but I was really in a downward spiral. So it was massively impactful to me. And, on the flip side, of course, when you're involved in activism to that level, where you find that, this is what I needed after all, it's then you go to the other side of the spectrum where you do too much, right? And you end up by burning out and like ending up in a pile on the floor. So it had gone from one extreme to the other. And then during the years of being involved, I've kind of realized that this is a bit of a pendulum, and finding that balance is incredibly difficult. And you only find that balance by, in my case, going over the line all the time until you find out what's right for you. And so that's where I'm at now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what you're talking about with, when you was talking about like your mental health suffering because of basically the climate crisis. It can feel like that sometimes when you see the whole ecosystem and planetary system that we rely on to survive kind of in like a downward spiral. You can tend to get a bit like, oh fuck, for fuck's sake, really, and I go for that myself, really. But yes, I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah. It was speaking with other people on the podcast where I started to relate to what other people were saying in the same way. I was learning a lot by speaking to people as much as I was trying to help listeners understand their journeys. A huge amount of my learning came from listening to other people.
Yeah. So, what kind of guests have you had on your show so far?
Oh, it's been a great mixture. The first 10 episodes were with scientists because of the, this is how it started. But even then, it's not like there were 10 episodes of the same thing. I was asking them about loads of different things, like how they felt about eco-anxiety and friends and family and their own backgrounds. What brought them into activism was all different. And it was a fascinating journey in the first 10. And after that, I thought, what about all the other people in activist groups? At that time, it was only Extinction Rebellion I was considering. And I started to talk with people in Christian climate action, for example, because I'm not religious myself, but I was interested to know what brought people in from that aspect. Sports people, a comedian I managed to speak with, Robert Llewellyn, who played Crichton on Red Dwarf, asking him about the role of comedy in the climate crisis. Spoke with Todd Smith, who used to be a pilot, who left piloting to get involved in activism, which is a fascinating journey. Paul Stevens was a police officer, and I spoke with people who used to work for The Sun and other media outlets about how media is all a big part of this and how it works, and their role in the climate crisis. Probably the most interesting interview that I can recall is speaking with a vet who used to work in industrial pig farming and left that industry to become an animal rights activist, and she developed PTSD through her experiences, and she was incredibly candid about her story and how seeing all of that terrible harm to animals can just mess you up, and how someone who works in that industry ended up, in fact, by murdering her own brother. So that was an awful story, and it was incredibly impactful. And since listening to that, I've become a lot more mindful, aware of the meat and dairy industries. And I spoke with two doctors, someone who used to work in the fossil fuel industry, and then I changed tact, and I thought, well, what about the young people who don't have careers behind them? What about young people who have got careers yet to come? How do they feel about it? So this new series is speaking to people who've not yet started careers, and thinking about what even is a career. Is there any point in a career? All of this stuff. And so this upcoming series is speaking to young people about how they feel about it all.
That's very interesting. We've always spoke before on the phone. You told me that you'd had Louis on as well. Louis from prison.
Yeah, that was a. He's got his mind together. That guy. It's brilliant. Really, everything that came out of his mouth it just seems so well considered, so thoughtful, and it's incredible to listen to someone like that. And I was able to speak to him twice over the phone until the prison had blocked my number with no reason given. And that episode hasn't come out yet. It will do soon, but I wanted to kind of add a bit in at the end to explain how that happened and why the prison had blocked my number, to try to find out what was going on and how people are being treated in prison. So that's been delayed a bit because I've been trying to get that information. But yeah, that was a.
I wouldn't expect to get any answers, mate.
No.
They won't give you any answers. Just the simple answer is they don't want somebody being interviewed from prison, and they don't want to say that, so they'll probably just avoid giving you a reason in the hopes that you'll give up asking.
Yeah. I've tried recording some of the phone calls, but then there's a difficulty here with permission, and I don't want to get the Grantham Institute in trouble for promoting it if I'm recording a phone call and then putting it out there without their permission. So I'm
doing that anyway.
Oh right, okay, really?
Yeah, I've just had Morgan Trowland on a few days ago, and I've just simply recorded the phone call, and I don't really give a damn about getting permission, to be honest. I'm coming at the climate crisis from like an activist kind of role, so that's kind of like resisting the system and breaking the rules is kind of like embedded in that anyway. So yeah, I don't really give a shit about getting permission. I can always get a new phone number.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's more about permission of the prison staff who I'm trying to grill in asking what reason do you have for blocking my number, and it's their responses which I'm a bit worried about putting in. I mean, I might get a voice actor to do it just to get around all of that. But, yeah, I mean, I'm totally on board with what you're saying. But I guess because it's going through a university, I don't want I don't want them to get in trouble for a decision I'm making on that basis.
So one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the show is because obviously you've got a podcast quite similar to the one we're doing, and you've been going for about 2 years, and you've done about 20 interviews, something like that. Is that right? About 22, something?
Yeah. I think we're at about episode 25, 26, something like that. Mm-hmm. And aiming to do 30. But doing these alongside doing a PhD is, man, it's hard. Every episode takes about 20 hours. I guess because I was quite new to it to start off with, but recording an audio podcast, it enables me to then cut it a lot more than you can hear on video, right? So I then cut out all the ums and ahs and try to make it as quick as possible. That takes ages. So the actual interviews last about 2 hours, and then I cut it down to about 45 minutes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. See, I'm with this Activism Uncensored, I'm really going for authenticity. So all the ums and ahs, I'm just leaving them in. All the swear words, all the bloopers. Like, if someone comes on my show and they start flapping, they start panicking on the show, and when people see that on the channel, and they're going to look at them and say, "Oh my God, this person is just like me."
Yeah,
they get nervous too.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I've just been uploading my episodes like raw, basically, which is why I've been able to do so many so quickly.
Yeah, Yeah,
I think
absolutely. So
I think you're my 10th guest. I think we're a month old now as well, so
yeah,
we're going for quantity really,
yeah,
where the quality's
it's a
improving.
great way of doing it, and as you say, it's about the humanity of it all, and leaving in the ums and ahs and stuff is absolutely fine that's the angle, right? It's the human angle, and this is really really important, and this is I think part of the reason why channels like GB News have become popular because it's less slick in a way. It gives the idea, the impression that people go on there and they are more human. Although, of course, as we know, there's a lot going on behind the scenes which manipulates the narrative. But this is, I think, part of the reason why that style of channel has become more popular because people like the human side. No. I mean, I've only watched it because I've been on it. uh, and that was a scary, really scary thing because you don't, you're throwing yourselves into the jaws of the lion there, and it can you feel very vulnerable. You're going into a kind of territory which is basically designed for the right wing to go crazy on themselves, and you're going in there as an activist spokesperson, and you just feel like raw meat in the Colosseum. But in a sense, I found that I was happy to go onto these shows because I wasn't talking to the hosts. I wasn't really. That wasn't my angle. The idea was that the only way I can speak to the real victims of society are through this channel. So, where the deep inequalities that have arisen from years of neglected services, you end up by getting people who watch these channels because, of whatever reasons they have. But the only way that you can talk to them is to go onto these channels. That's how I found anyway. They're not going to see my tweets. They're not going to see, unlikely to see this kind of video. They're unlikely to see a speech I give on the street. The only way to talk to these people is to go onto these news channels that they watch and to be reasonable. And it's hard. It's really hard. But the more I did it, I've been on 5 or 6 times now. And I've actually raised about £1,000 for XR Legal because all of the money that they give me, I give to Legal Defence Fund. And in a sense, I feel like I've done a lot of fundraising as well as talking to the people who is really, really difficult to get a hold of otherwise. So the function of those extreme channels is to continue to polarize the population, but if you can go in there and reduce that polarization by being reasonable, that's been my tactic so far.
It is a tricky one really. How do you reach those people that are in kind of their own echo chambers? Because I think a lot of us today are in our own echo chambers with social media. You only hear opinions that you agree with. And a lot of the people who are right-wing, who want to listen to GB News, for example, they only hear opinions that they agree with. So I guess you do need to go onto their show to really get you and be reasonable to have your opinion heard by those people. Yeah,
that's right. That's how I found it. And when you're sat next to someone who you despise, it's so it takes a kind of Zen-like state to not react in that way that you might want to. But it's been easier every time. And I even managed
is that representing is that for representing Scientist Rebellion?
Well, in a sense, Scientist Rebellion is actually surprisingly a separate group to Scientists for Extinction Rebellion.
Yeah,
The
I didn't
Scientist
know that.
Rebellion is an offshoot, and it has become a more global scientist coalition. Scientists for Extinction Rebellion is really UK based, so there are
Hmm.
differences absolutely between the groups, but I flit between the two. But on GB News, I've been speaking on behalf of, well, generally Extinction Rebellion,
Hmm.
but it's been with a scientific bent sometimes. Like I've talked about wood burning stoves, that kind of stuff,
Can I ask you a
because that's my
question? So,
expertise. Yeah.
that's your question. So, have you not had any issues from Extinction Rebellion for having your own podcast as well as being a spokesperson?
No, not at all. I think in Extinction Rebellion you can do what you want. I don't think there are rules which or people who call you out for doing things. Um, Although I guess maybe there might be, but I haven't come across that experience myself. And doing things, doing your own projects which are helping the cause, I think, in my experience, have been quite well supported. I spoke with one of the spokes for Just Stop Oil called Patrick Hart, who's a GP, and um, I think he's done a great job. He's as a GP. I think he's always worried that he would lose his license to operate as a GP, right? Because the idea of being kind of politically radical it is at odds with being an impartial GP. But his arguments obviously are that he's acting on his oath, his Hippocratic oath, to save as many lives as he can, right? And to do that, you've got to stop burning fossil fuels to save millions, billions of lives. And how many GPs can say that they've ever done that? So he finds it hard to get the flack from his work and the governing body. But people with these kinds of supposedly impartial professions feel that getting involved, especially in spokes stuff, really puts themselves at risk. And the Public Order Act, I think, has threatened that even more, because people feel that they don't want to lose their jobs because of being a spokes. But it's like it troubles everyone, because people don't want that to be the barrier from actually stopping this huge cascade of harm. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's the kinds of question that I find quite difficult to ask my guests, because it's I think when people just know it's going to go bad, and then they kind of stop at that point. But when you really delve into the detail about how bad, what kind of bad, what kind of thing are we talking about, it can be petrifying. And I think, let's say, within the next 5 to 10 years, when every year is likely to be hotter than the last, rainier, more droughts, and so on. I've just written a children's book on an adaptation to Sinbad the Sailor and his tales of travelling around the world, and I've tried to wrap into this like a cascade effect. So a part of the way I've tried to write the story is he comes back from a voyage super rich and he buys a forest and he chops down the forest to make a boat to go travelling again. And that forest that he's chopped down, he's converted into a farm for cattle. And then he has to chop down another forest so he can feed them. And before he knows it, he's chopped down all the forests in the area. And he's had to fertilise it because the soils have all gone. And all of the insects die, all the rivers are polluted, and no one in the town can grow their fruit and vegetables because all the pollinators have gone. And it's kind of a cascade effect of how doing something like, oh, I can be even richer if I chop down this forest, what that leads to. And that exercise is quite hard to do because you end up, if you kind of go down this cascade using logical reasoning, that you get to mass migrations and wars and mass death, right? You end up there. That's the end journey of any sort of these scenarios. For example, like coral reefs dying, people think, oh, that's sad. All of those David Attenborough shows will have to film something else. But what it means is like it's not just the livelihoods of all the people in that area, and nature itself, right, is just totally obliterated. But what knock-on effects does that have? It's the sharks that use those reefs as a nursery, and if they don't have one, sharks come out of the ecosystem as well as being trawled. And what does that do to an ecosystem? It totally messes it up. You end up by having like a lifeless ocean because all of the ocean life kind of survives on each other. And then you look at how many people rely on fish to survive and what they do if they don't have any. And then you get mass migrations as well. And it's what happens when the glacial melt on mountains. If they go, and they are going, they create huge floods as they melt really fast. And then there's droughts because there's no glacial melt left. And it's millions of people who rely on glacial melt, the water that comes off mountains, for their rice, for their drinking, for their functionality, right? You look at the number of people in the north of India who rely on glacial melt. And when these glaciers melt forever, there won't be any water. And what will that do? And especially in a region that's like the Indian-Chinese border, people fighting over water resources, man, what's going to happen there? They're both nuclear nations. So what I think is going to be like, oh, what is the trajectory? You can kind of come up with these logical steps, but there are always these things you hadn't foreseen as well, things you didn't think about, that inevitably make the situation even worse than that. And you can step into this mindset academically to think, as I am doing now, to describe a situation as it unfolds. But as I'm doing this, I'm very aware that I'm taking away the human element of that. What does it mean for someone who is having to migrate from their home? What does that do to someone? How many families will be destroyed from that? How many suicides? How many people will have their lives totally ruined? And I went to a retreat last week to get away from it all, and there was a 2,000-year-old tree, and when you touch a 2,000-year-old tree, it really does something to you. your mind sees those 2,000 years and what we've done in the blink of its eye, and it gives it a really, really different perspective that we don't really have in this kind of very, very quick changing world where everything is different every 3 months. You see a 2,000-year-old tree and you go, wow, that kind of puts it into perspective a bit. And I really encourage people to do that.
Well, I mean, a human life really is really short in comparison, to geological time and, the age of the Earth and so that tree, for example, 2,000 years, that's like as old as like Christianity, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's as old as it's older than much older than our country. It's older than the British Empire. Well, it's maybe not older than our country, but yeah, I guess people don't really see the climate crisis happening because they kind of live day to day, and the climate crisis can happen quite slow. Well, not quite slowly, but as compared to like geological time, it's quite quickly. But to a human life, the change can seem quite slow, like over a whole human life. So there's a lot of people. So I've met a lot of people who say, well, they haven't noticed any change. But again, obviously, you can't really. I don't know how they can say that, to be honest, because there has been quite a lot of change just in one lifetime. Just look at the winters. Right now we have winters. We don't really have real winters anymore, do we? Like we used to. Like when my dad was a child in the 1950s, they used to get big snow drifts, and now we have winters with no snow.
I think the ways to do this are to make it so that people imagine what it is we're talking about. In a sense that people don't know something that they can't imagine. People can't imagine it, right? So films, stories, ways to get into people's minds about what it means in a similar way to how I was maybe stumbling through ideas about what might happen if glaciers melt and coral reefs die, but explaining it in a way that is compelling in a storytelling way. So Hollywood, for example, if they made a film that explained 3 different scenarios, right? We'll say, we'll keep fossil fuels and we'll keep doing everything we're doing and see what happens. Story number 1. Story number 2, let's just imagine that we are doing everything we can, which is not everything we can, and working within the realm of capitalism to make the solutions, right? Let's see what happens then. And then third scenario, let's just imagine that we are going to not get any more fossil fuels out of the ground. We're going to stop all of that and imagine what we're going to do. Not just where are we going to get our energy from, but how are we going to reduce our energy consumption so we don't need to require so much energy in our societies. What could that look like? How is it so much better? And one of the things that I tried to do in this book that I wrote was to say, there's this horse race going on, right? And he goes to the city and he sees the terrible way that the horses are treated, and the protester goes on to the racetrack and blocks it, right? Everyone's really upset, but then people start talking, and they have this kind of imagination about what they would do instead of having a horse race. And what they decide to do is every month they would have like a horse-themed party where they all go in the streets dressed up as horses and dance and be merry, right? And it's just a way to say that's better, actually. That's a better thing to do because it's so much more community-based. It's not based on animal cruelty or betting and gambling and all of this horrible stuff. It's actually cutting all of that out and saying, what would it be like to sing and dance and just imagine a life like that? And I think that's really important, because unless people can imagine a better world, that all they will see is what's being taken away. And if you're saying, well, we're going to stop that, and we're going to stop that, and we're going to stop that, people will not be with you, because they're like, oh, you're taking this away from me, because they don't have the imagination about what it might be like instead. And it's really hard for us because, yeah, but it's really hard for us to imagine like what the world could be like, because we haven't been given this imagination either. We need to rely on the people who have that vision about what it might be like to make that a lot more widely seen, widely known and understood.
Can I just add in here? I've got a vision for the future. Imagine a world where animal agriculture has ended, but vegan healthy food is free, and billionaires are taxed, but public transport is regular and free, and we replant all the world's forests, and we stop burning fossil fuels, and we prioritize the well-being of people and nature over profit.
Yeah.
Imagine what kind of world we could build.
Yeah. And that would be amazing, wouldn't it? That'd be totally amazing. People would be thinking, though, how could you have a public transport system that's free but when it has running costs? And it's trying to answer those questions. That's where it starts to get a bit harder. But then, why not imagine that it could be like that and then think about the problems afterwards, rather than straight away coming and saying, oh, it can't be done because. If you just kind of hang your hat on that for a minute, just imagine what it would be like to have free transport, to have free vegan food. I mean, that'd be totally amazing. And to imagine that would be something, I think, Hollywood or filmmakers, that's where they could step up to bring that vision to a reality in people's minds.
I just feel so strongly now that we need, let's listen to the United Nations. This is humanity's last chance now. If we're going to stop runaway climate change, and we can't wait 10 years. We can't wait, 5 years. We need to start right now, and we need to imagine these things and then make them happen. And personally, this isn't for everybody, but personally, I'm of the belief that the current political system that we have right now, where we have two parties, Labour or Conservative, it's not really fit for purpose, in my opinion. And I believe that we need a whole new system. But if we have to do that, we have to be very careful, because sometimes if you overthrow a system without replacing it with a better system first, shit can really go really badly, really, really quickly.
Yeah, you've seen this in the Thatcher years with the coal mines, right? How things can go so badly wrong when you just take things away without replacing it with something.
So what? I'm not sure about what is it you're talking about there?
Well, in the
Can you elaborate?
In the 80s, a lot of the coal mines were closed, but people weren't offered a transition into anything else. And yeah, coal mining or coal burning is totally awful, and it should definitely have gone. But if you don't get rid of it with actually valuing the people who do it themselves and say, we're going to help you to move into a career that's actually something much better for society, and instead just say, you haven't got that job anymore, see ya, as they did in the 80s, it means, well, they weren't rich. These are poor, really poor people, and they had nothing. And the areas that had some kind of income through coal mining suddenly had that taken away. It ruins their societies. People in those societies became so depressed. These are the places where you get the gambling shops and the Gregs, right? This is what happens to these kind of societies where people are then having to buy the cheapest foods to gamble to try to pay their rent and losing it all, right? And this is the kind of cascade that happens if people aren't helped out of a situation which has got to change. And I don't feel that is necessarily so much of a priority for the people working at Shell, because they're in it for the money. They went into that career to be as wealthy as they could be. They weren't doing it for any reason other than that, however much they might be telling themselves. So I have a lot less sympathy for people working in those companies than I do for the coal miners. But let's say farming, animal agriculture, when you have people who are making livelihoods off this, they have to be helped out of that situation. If we're trying to say we're going to rewild this land instead of growing silage for cattle in the winter, we're going to put a woodland there instead. That farmer needs to be able to do that without losing all of their, what they had before. Unless they're super rich, in which case, fuck them. But if they're not super rich, then having government help, I think, is important to get them to transition.
We need to stop acting like 160 different countries and start acting as one planet. For example, like poor farmers in Brazil, for example, they need to cut down Amazon rainforests in able to expand their farms and grow more cattle and make some money to feed their children. And we need to be subsidising those same farmers so that they get more money from replanting those forests than they would do by cutting them down. We need to make it financially profitable to actually benefit nature and to plant the forests and expand the forests.
I agree,
in my
but
opinion.
How fucked are we that we feel that we need to make money for keeping nature?
Well, it's kind of the systems. It's kind of the system we've got, really. I mean, like, if I used to say, like, if you could become a millionaire by capturing carbon and storing it in the ground, then the carbon capture technology would advance much more rapidly than it is doing now, because entrepreneurs would step in and they'd always, I do believe in market forces. Market forces are really, really good at solving problems when there's a profit to be made. Nothing quite motivates people like making money.
Although the interesting thing is, that's not the only motivation that gets people going. The motivation can be personal value, and the value system can be different to how it is now, where we see value as money, and we see money as a means to buy things, and we are marketed that buying things makes us more valuable people. But it doesn't have to be that kind of way that we perceive value. Instead, if we were to be going to a gathering, a value in that situation could be how much fun you're having, or how much respect you are giving each other. Value can be something that is not necessarily related to finance. And I think if we can switch our minds to actually realizing that, then we don't need money as a motivator to do great things. And I think that that's something where the imagination is the limiting factor. It's the demonstration of how people can be motivated without a financial incentive. What does that look like? Because if without that, we just have to keep making money, whatever we do. To do anything, we have to make money out of it. To stop chopping down a forest, we've got to make money out of it. It's totally insane. Because it's only a thing after money was invented. Before money was invented, we didn't feel we had to chop down the trees at all. We saw the value in the tree. We saw the value in what a forest can do, and we don't see that value anymore. But it's not because it's not there. It's because we've had the value stripped away from us. And it's reimagining that value. It's reawakening our minds to that value.
See, I don't know, like, I think as long as a tree is worth more money chopped down and made into planks than it is standing there taking in carbon dioxide, I think we've got a serious problem we've got a systemic problem on our hands. See, that system change that you're talking about there, like the reinvention of what value really is in society, I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I don't know how it would work practically. But I do think it is practical to kind of change the rules of the game so that you get tax relief when you. So like one idea that I came up with a couple of years ago when I first got involved. Imagine, take building materials for example, right? Imagine if you change the rules so that for every X amount of captured carbon that you store into your building materials, the more tax reductions you get on your products, your building materials, then entrepreneurs would be financially incentivized to figure out how to store the most captured carbon into per square meter of building materials, and then that would increase the price on captured carbon, which would then incentivize other entrepreneurs to find the most cost-effective way of drawing carbon out of the atmosphere, and that would effectively be using market forces to solve the problem. And it wouldn't be redesigning the system. It wouldn't be redesigning our capitalist extractive system. It'd be changing the rules to have that system work for the climate than against it. But I do think that we need system change, but we are so late in the game right now. Like, it's kind of now or never, and we need these solutions to be brought in right now, if you ask me.
Yeah. I think you're right that using market forces is perhaps an easier transition for us to make. But I think that we can't have market forces, the good stuff, without the bad stuff. It only works when you take something from nothing. That's the only way that this kind of works. We have a really extractive monetary system. So money comes out of nothing in the form of extracting from nature. It's free. But it's free at that point, but it costs us in the future. So the whole kind of foundations of capitalism in that way, that extractive capitalism, is totally unsustainable. And what unsustainable means is that you get to the top of the ladder, and then what do? You fall off it. And to say that market forces can work in that way, it's never isolated. It's never in its own little island where you can say, oh, well, that bit's fine and the rest of it can go. Because if the rest of it goes, then that won't work either. Because then, well, why do people want the money? Because then they want to do this or to do that. And then it becomes suddenly a big net web of quite an extractive system. And I agree that we're running out of time and that things in many cases have run out of time. But I don't think we should be limiting our imagination to what we think we're capable of doing. Because if we did that, we're sleepwalking into nightmares. If we restrict ourselves to what we think we're capable of doing, I think we need to be a bit more ambitious and try to do things that haven't been done before, and just seeing what that looks like.
See, I'm part, like what you just said right then about trying to do things that haven't been done before really resonated with me, because I'm trying to be a part of building the largest non-violent movement in the history of mankind. The biggest movement that has ever been seen in the history of mankind, and that has never been done before. And to do that, obviously, we have to do things that have never been done before, which is kind of putting all my eggs in that one basket, to be honest, at this minute. I just hope we can do this, to be honest. Like, I really do. I really do. Like,
and I think that if we see things done in the right way, all we need to do is see it once, and then suddenly there'll be a cascade, there'll be an avalanche of action. We just need to see it. We just need to see what it'd be like if it's better. Everyone who is on GB News or on Good Morning Britain or anywhere will all say, I'm having a really difficult time. And this is unfortunately, I think, where people were in the 30s in Germany. People were having a really bad time, and solutions came to say, oh, things will be a lot better if you vote for me, or don't vote, but you know what I mean. And that's how fascism started. So we're in a position where if we don't treat this properly and imagine the impossible, we will be vulnerable to someone coming in and saying, I'll fix it all for you if you vote for me. But what I will do is stop all protest or make it illegal to say anything I do is wrong. Because this is what Hitler did.
Yeah.
And he was only able to get where he was because people couldn't imagine things any other way. And I think we have to learn from that. And really brave the idea of doing something that hasn't been done before, and stepping up to the challenges. This is where filmmakers come in, and this is where storytellers come in, and the arts, music, all sorts, just to imagine the impossible.
I was about to say to you then, because I can only record 1 hour at a time. We're about to hit that limit now. Or 15. I'm about to say, is there anything you want to say to the viewers before we get cut off? But you just said a pretty good thing. That's pretty good. You said right there. We could continue a bit further, but I need to end the video in about 45 seconds.
It's fine. I think you're doing an excellent job. Anyone watching this, I hope you're enthused. You're coming out of this with ideas you didn't have before, and that's the idea of this channel, and I think you're doing such great work. And I really hope that anyone coming away from this feels more positive.
Yes, that we can do it. Well, thank you for coming on the show. We're about to run out of video anyway, so with the ending of this will have to just be audio only. Right. The video's over. So if you liked what what Peter had to say here, please check out his channel on it's on Spotify. The link
Spotify, yeah.
The link to your channel will be in the description of this video below. If you like the content we put out on Activism Uncensored, please consider liking and subscribing. And we have a Patreon account. Is there anything you'd like to say for rounding off, Peter?
No, I'm just really excited to see where this goes, and to listen to who else you've got coming up, and hearing all of their ideas as well. Oh, one thing I did fail to mention really at all is the total unequal nature of it all, in a sense that when I say we need to make the difference, what I mean by we is the top 10% of consumption. The top 10% of the consumers consume 50%, right? And when I say we, they're the people I'm talking about. And I really want to make that clear, that I'm not talking about the poorest 50% of the people in the world. I'm really not.
Yeah, that is down to us now, really, isn't it?
Yeah, the richest nations, absolutely.
Well, I don't have all the answers, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure, absolutely. And thanks for asking me. Right,
no worries.
Josh.
Bye.